For nearly 180 years, humanity had expanded beyond the cradle of Earth. What had once been a single fragile world had become the heart of the United Terran Alliance, a civilization spread across dozens of star systems linked by hyperspace corridors and defended by a powerful interstellar navy. The early centuries of expansion had been filled with hardship. Pirate kingdoms, rogue colonies, and resource wars had nearly fractured humanity before it truly found its place among the stars. Those difficult years taught an unforgettable lesson. Peace could only survive if it was protected. Out of those lessons came the Sentinel line, a chain of heavily armed defense stations and patrol fleets stretching across the outer frontier. It marked the edge of explored space, where every unknown signal was treated with caution and every patrol might become humanity's first contact with a new civilization. The Sentinel line had remained quiet for more than 20 years. Merchant convoys crossed its sectors daily, scientific expeditions ventured cautiously into unexplored regions, and military patrols had become predictable routines rather than desperate battles. Many younger officers had never experienced a real war. They studied famous campaigns in classrooms and simulators, but none of them had watched a friend disappear into vacuum or heard the silence that followed a ship breaking apart in space. Among the vessels assigned to the frontier was the battleship HSS Resolute, one of the Alliance Navy's newest heavy warships. Nearly 2 kilometers long, the Resolute carried advanced plasma batteries, missile arrays, interceptor squadrons, and enough armor to survive sustained bombardment. Despite its impressive firepower, its greatest strength was not its weapons but its crew, carefully selected from some of the Alliance's most experienced officers. Standing quietly on the bridge, Commander Elena Ward watched thousands of stars drift across the enormous tactical display. Her posture remained perfectly still, hands folded behind her back, while officers moved efficiently around their stations. At 46 years old, Elena carried herself with calm authority rather than intimidation. A faint scar traced across her left cheek, one of the few visible reminders of the war that had shaped her career. She rarely spoke loudly, never sought attention, and had earned the respect of her crew by making careful decisions under impossible circumstances. The silence on the bridge was broken by Lieutenant David Ross, the intelligence officer. "Commander, another cargo convoy has cleared the Sentinel Gate. All civilian traffic is proceeding on schedule." Elena nodded. "Any unusual sensor readings?" "Nothing beyond normal background radiation." She smiled faintly. "Let's hope it stays that way." Across the bridge, a young tactical officer leaned back in his chair with a grin. "I almost wish something interesting would happen. We've spent 6 months chasing smugglers and recalibrating navigation buoys." Several nearby officers chuckled. Before Elena could respond, Captain Victor Hayes, the ship's executive officer, folded his arms. "Be careful what you wish for, Lieutenant." The young officer shrugged. "With respect, sir, this sector has been quiet for decades." Victor looked toward the commander before answering. "It was quiet once in the Orion frontier too." The bridge became noticeably quieter. The younger officers recognized the name immediately. The Orion frontier disaster was required reading at the Naval Academy. Elena finally turned toward them. "You've all studied the reports," she said calmly. "But reports don't capture reality." Nobody spoke. After several seconds, she continued. 23 years ago, a fleet commander saw an enemy force retreating. He believed they'd broken formation and ordered pursuit. The enemy had planned it perfectly. They lured our ships into overlapping ambush positions hidden behind a moon." Her voice remained steady. "We lost 18 ships in under 30 minutes. The young tactical officer lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry, Commander. You weren't there," Elena replied gently. "There's nothing to apologize for." She looked back at the stars. "I was." The bridge fell completely silent. No one asked another question. They all knew Elena had survived the Orion disaster. But very few knew she had lost her older brother aboard one of the destroyed cruisers. Since that day, she had never mistaken silence for safety or weakness for vulnerability. Several decks below, life aboard the Resolute continued with practiced precision. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Dr. Sarah Chen supervised maintenance crews replacing worn plasma conduits. Although barely 35, Sarah possessed a reputation for solving problems that computer systems declared impossible. One of her technicians sighed while examining a damaged relay. "Why do these systems always fail during inspections instead of battles?" Sarah laughed softly. Because machines enjoy embarrassing engineers. The crew shared a brief laugh before returning to work. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Marcus Hale inspected the ship's marine detachment. Unlike many officers, Marcus preferred training alongside his soldiers rather than watching from observation decks. Sweat covered the Marines as they completed close-quarters combat drills inside rotating gravity simulators. Marcus removed his helmet. Again, one exhausted Marine groaned. "Sir, we've been running this exercise for 3 hours." Marcus nodded. "And you'll be grateful for every extra minute if you ever need it." Another Marine smiled. "You really think pirates will start boarding a battleship?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "I don't train for what I expect." He looked around the room. "I train for what I can't predict." Far above, on the bridge, routine patrol reports continued flowing across the tactical displays. Everything suggested another peaceful day on the frontier. Then every console suddenly chimed at once. The operations officer looked up sharply. "Commander. Hyperspace disturbance detected." The bridge instantly shifted from relaxed conversation to disciplined efficiency. "Source?" Elena asked. "Extreme range. Bearing 093. Magnify." The forward display zoomed towards a distant point where empty space shimmered unnaturally. Moments later, a brilliant tear of blue-white light split the darkness. Something enormous emerged. The unknown vessel drifted silently out of hyperspace, moving slower than any military ship should. Even from several million kilometers away, its silhouette dwarfed every vessel in the surrounding sector. Jagged armor plating covered its immense hull, while deep scars stretched across its surface as though it had survived countless battles. The tactical officer stared in disbelief. "My God!" David Ross rapidly examined the sensor feed. "No matching records." "Size estimate?" Elena asked. "Approximately 3,000 meters." Victor Hayes frowned. "That's nearly 50% larger than the Resolute." Another alarm sounded. "Commander. Multiple hull breaches detected." Sarah's voice came through the internal communications network from engineering. "I'm reading catastrophic structural damage. That ship shouldn't even be operational." The tactical officer continued analyzing incoming data. "Main weapons show minimal activity." "What about shields?" Elena asked. He hesitated before answering. "Approximately 9%. Several officers exchanged surprised glances. Victor finally broke the silence. "If those readings are accurate, one coordinated strike would disable them." David frowned. "Unless the sensors are wrong." Before anyone could respond, the communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving an automated transmission." "Put it through." A harsh mechanical voice echoed across the bridge. "Vessel identified. Dominion battleship. Draxon Expeditionary Fleet." The message ended abruptly. No greeting, no warning, no explanation, only silence. David looked up. "They're not responding to any of our hails." Another officer smiled nervously. "Maybe they're too damaged to fight." Elena never looked away from the enormous vessel drifting across the stars. Her instincts, sharpened by decades of service, refused to accept what the sensors were telling her. A ship that large should not have survived long enough to reach human space with shields below 10%. It simply didn't make sense. She quietly folded her hands behind her back. "Maintain distance." Victor looked at her. "You think it's a trap?" Elena answered without taking her eyes off the screen. "I don't know." She paused for several long seconds before speaking again. "But ships this size don't survive wars by making mistakes." At that exact moment, Fleet Command transmitted a priority message to every human vessel in the sector. "All units. Unknown alien battleship confirmed hostile until proven otherwise. Interception fleet assembling. Prepare for combat operations." The long piece of the Sentinel line had just come to an end. The command center of the Sentinel line came alive within minutes. Across the frontier, Alliance warships disengaged from their patrol routes and accelerated toward the unidentified vessel. The HSS Resolute was joined by 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, 2 carrier escorts, and dozens of smaller support ships. On the tactical display, blue icons steadily formed a wide semicircle around the alien battleship while maintaining a cautious distance of nearly 50,000 kilometers. Every captain had received the same order from Fleet Command: intercept the unknown vessel, determine its intentions if possible, and neutralize it if it proved hostile. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Elena Ward studied the growing fleet formation. She noticed that the alien ship remained almost motionless, drifting silently through space without changing course. It made no attempt to escape, raise its shields, or reposition itself for battle. The behavior disturbed her more than open aggression would have. Victor Hayes glanced at the tactical display. Every ship is in position. They're practically surrounded. Elena nodded slowly. That's exactly what worries me. David Ross looked up from his intelligence console. We've translated another fragment from their automated broadcast. It repeats only one phrase. Draxon Expeditionary Fleet. No diplomatic protocols. No distress signal. No demands. So they either can't communicate, Victor said, or they don't intend to. Before anyone could respond, Fleet Command interrupted over the secure channel. All units, this is Admiral Nathan Brooks. Final assessment classifies the unidentified vessel as a probable hostile military asset. Attempts at communication have failed. You are authorized to disable the target. Minimize unnecessary destruction if surrender becomes possible. The bridge acknowledged the order. Elena remained silent. Admiral Brooks noticed. Commander Ward, your recommendation? She hesitated for only a second. Sir, the situation doesn't fit. Explain. The vessel is badly damaged, isolated, and operating with less than 10% shield capacity. Yet it crossed unexplored space and entered one of our most heavily defended sectors. Either their commander is incompetent. She paused. Or we're missing something. A brief silence followed. Finally, the Admiral answered. Your caution is noted, Commander. Proceed with standard engagement protocols. The transmission ended. Victor sighed quietly. I suppose that's our answer. Elena gave a single nod. It is. Across the fleet, weapon systems powered to full combat readiness. Massive plasma cannons rotated into firing position while missile tubes opened along the hulls of human warships. Fighter squadrons remained aboard their carriers, held in reserve until the battle's direction became clear. The operations officer announced, target remains stationary. Tactical lock confirmed. Weapons standing by. Elena took one final look at the silent alien vessel. Fire a warning volley. Aim for the forward armor only. Seconds later, 3 human cruisers unleashed brilliant blue plasma beams that streaked across the darkness. The energy bolts struck the alien battleship's weakened shields, producing ripples of pale orange light before exploding harmlessly against its scarred hull. Minimal damage. No response. The tactical officer frowned. They didn't even try to evade. Victor folded his arms. Again. This time, the entire front line fired together. Heavy plasma batteries, kinetic railguns, and guided missiles converged upon the enormous vessel. Explosions raced across its damaged exterior as sections of already broken armor shattered away into space. Shield strength dropped. 9%, 7%, 5%. Cheers erupted from several younger officers aboard nearby ships. We're breaking through. They're finished. They never stood a chance. Even aboard the Resolute, a few smiles appeared. Only Elena remained expressionless. David quietly noticed. You still don't believe this is real. She answered without looking away. I've seen dying ships. And? They fight. As if responding to her words, the alien flagship finally moved. Not forward. Not backward. Instead, countless antenna-like structures slowly extended from beneath its battered armor. The tactical officer blinked. Commander. Those aren't weapons. David's console suddenly flooded with warnings. Energy surge detected. What kind? I don't know. The enormous vessel released no missiles, fired no plasma beams, and activated no shield generators. Instead, invisible pulses spread outward in every direction. The communications officer frowned. I'm detecting hundreds of encrypted transmissions. Victor looked confused. They're broadcasting? David rapidly enlarged the sensor feed. Not toward us. Then where? He swallowed. Everywhere. Within seconds, the mysterious transmissions disappeared into the surrounding darkness. Nothing happened. For nearly 10 long seconds, space remained perfectly still. One destroyer captain laughed over the fleet channel. That's it? They sent a message before surrendering? Several officers chuckled. Then every long-range sensor aboard the human fleet screamed at once. The bridge lights briefly dimmed under the flood of emergency alerts. The operations officer shouted, multiple gravitational distortions. David's eyes widened. No. Elena stepped forward. Report. He enlarged the tactical display. Around the human fleet, Dozens of tiny empty sectors suddenly erupted with impossible readings. Asteroid fields that had appeared lifeless only moments before shimmered violently. Their surfaces rippled, then vanished. Victor stared in disbelief. They weren't asteroids. One after another, enormous stealth fields collapsed. Hidden beneath them waited warships. Not one, not 5, dozens. Massive black hulls emerged from concealment across every direction of space. Cruisers, destroyers, assault carriers, missile barges, 42 enemy vessels, every one of them already in firing position. The bridge fell silent. David whispered, almost to himself. The damaged flagship, Elena finished the sentence, was bait. Before Fleet Command could issue new orders, brilliant crimson beams erupted simultaneously from the hidden Draxan fleet. The first volley slammed into the Alliance destroyer Valiant Spear, overwhelming its shields in seconds. A second barrage punched through its reactor compartment. The ship exploded into thousands of glowing fragments. Another cruiser lost both engines. A carrier's flight deck vanished beneath a wave of plasma fire. The carefully organized human formation dissolved into chaos. Fleet-wide alarms echoed across every communications channel. We're taking fire from the rear. Starboard shields collapsing. I've lost helm control. Medical teams to Deck 9. The tactical display transformed into a storm of flashing warnings. Victor gripped the command console. We're surrounded. Another blast rocked the Resolute as enemy fire struck its shields. The ship shuddered violently. Engineering immediately reported. Forward shields down to 78%. Elena remained calm. Helm, rotate 20 degrees port. Executing. Tactical, concentrate defensive batteries on incoming missiles. Confirmed. Signal every ship within range. David looked over. What message? Her voice never rose. Break formation immediately. But Fleet Command. The original formation no longer exists. The communications officer transmitted the order. One by one, nearby captains acknowledged. Instead of remaining trapped in the deadly semicircle, human ships scattered into smaller combat groups, making themselves harder targets. The maneuver came just in time. A second coordinated Draxan volley tore through the exact position where the fleet had been gathered moments earlier. Several ships escaped by only a few kilometers. Admiral Brooks finally reappeared on every command channel. His expression was grim. All Alliance vessels, Emergency Protocol Theta. Unknown hostile fleet confirmed. Engage at captain's discretion. Survive first. Regroup second. The transmission ended as interference overwhelmed communications. The battle had changed completely. This was no longer an interception. It was an ambush. Elena watched the tactical display as 42 Draxan warships closed in from every direction, their battered flagship remaining almost motionless at the center of the battlefield. She quietly exhaled. They wanted us to surround them. Victor nodded. So every hidden ship could surround us. Outside the bridge windows, brilliant flashes of blue and crimson weapons fire illuminated the darkness as humanity's long era of frontier peace vanished in a single devastating moment. The real battle for the Sentinel line had finally begun. The battle spread across the Sentinel line like a wildfire. Human warships darted between streams of crimson plasma while guided missiles streaked across the darkness, leaving brilliant trails behind them. Explosions flashed continuously across the battlefield as Alliance vessels tried to regroup into smaller formations. Commander Elena Ward's decision to break the original encirclement had prevented an even greater disaster, but the price was already severe. The destroyers Valiant Spear and Ardent Dawn had been lost within the opening minutes, while two cruisers drifted powerless after suffering catastrophic engine failures. Even the mighty Resolute had taken repeated shield impacts, forcing its defensive systems to work at maximum capacity. Tactical report, Elena ordered. The young officer's hands moved rapidly across his console. Enemy fleet has divided into attack groups. They're trying to isolate damaged ships from the rest of the fleet. Victor Hayes nodded grimly. Smart strategy. David Ross enlarged the battlefield display. The Draxans aren't firing randomly. Every attack is coordinated. It's like every ship already knows exactly where the others will strike. Before Elena could answer, the bridge shook violently as another barrage struck their shields. Starboard shields down to 63%. Engineering reported. Sarah Chen's calm voice followed almost immediately. Reinforcing the forward shield grid, Commander, But we can't keep absorbing hits forever. Elena remained composed. Keep us moving. A stationary ship is an easy target. The Resolute rolled gracefully through space as enemy plasma bolts passed only a few hundred meters from its hull. Alliance escorts answered with disciplined bursts from their railguns, forcing several Draxan destroyers to alter course. Neither side held a clear advantage anymore. Every kilometer of space had become a contested battlefield. Then the operations officer looked up sharply. "Commander. Multiple high-speed contacts approaching." Victor frowned. "Missiles?" The officer shook his head. "No, sir." The tactical display magnified the incoming objects. Nearly 30 small craft had detached from several Draxan cruisers. Unlike missiles, they were making tiny course corrections as they accelerated. David's face tightened. "Those are assault pods." Victor blinked. "They're attempting a boarding action?" "They're not even trying to destroy us," David replied. Elena's expression hardened. Security alert throughout the ship. The ship-wide alarm echoed through every corridor. Battle stations. Battle stations. Possible hostile boarding action. All personnel report to emergency positions immediately. Deep inside the Resolute, crew members dropped what they were doing and hurried toward reinforced shelters or combat stations. Massive blast doors began sliding shut across key junctions while automated defense systems powered online. Red emergency lighting replaced the normal white illumination, bathing every corridor in an ominous crimson glow. Lieutenant Marcus Hale was already running toward the Marine Armory when the alert sounded. One of his sergeants looked at him. "You think they'll actually board us, sir?" Marcus picked up his combat helmet. "If they built assault pods, they intend to use them." Within moments, nearly 80 Marines assembled in full combat armor. Pulse rifles, magnetic shotguns, and portable shield projectors were distributed with practiced efficiency. Marcus walked to the center of the room. "Listen carefully." The room became silent. "We've trained for this for years." He looked each soldier in the eyes. "You know these corridors better than anyone else in the galaxy." One nervous young Marine swallowed. "What if they're stronger than us?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Then we'll be smarter." The Marines answered with determined nods. Back on the bridge, alarms suddenly multiplied. Impact detected. The first assault pod slammed into the Resolute's outer hull with a deafening metallic crash. Then another. And another. 28 impacts echoed through the battleship within seconds. Victor stared at the damage display. "They're attaching themselves all over the ship." David counted rapidly. "Engineering. Cargo deck 4. Maintenance ring. Life support junction. They're spreading out." Elena immediately understood. "They're avoiding heavily defended sections." The operations officer confirmed her suspicion. "They've chosen vulnerable access points." Another violent vibration passed through the ship. Sarah's voice came over the intercom. "They've started cutting through the hull." Marcus received the report only seconds later. "Enemy breach confirmed on deck 11. A Marine asked, "Orders?" Marcus raised his rifle. "Seal every adjacent corridor." The ship's internal security system activated automatically. Massive titanium bulkheads slammed shut between decks, isolating sections of the vessel. Motion detectors, thermal scanners, life sign sensors, atmospheric monitors. Hundreds of automated systems began tracking every movement aboard the Resolute. The artificial intelligence announced calmly. "Unknown biological signatures detected. Internal sensor network fully engaged." Marcus smiled. "Good." One of his officers looked puzzled. "Sir? The ship is fighting with us now." The first breach alarm sounded. Deck 11. The reinforced hull finally gave way. Smoke poured into the corridor as the assault pod's cutting equipment shut down. The circular hatch exploded inward. 4 towering alien soldiers stepped into the ship. They stood nearly 2.5 meters tall beneath dark metallic armor that covered almost every part of their bodies. Their helmets resembled elongated reptilian skulls, hiding their faces behind narrow glowing visors. Instead of rifles, they carried compact energy carbines and heavy-bladed weapons attached to their forearms. The lead Marine whispered, "They're huge." Marcus spoke calmly. "Size doesn't win battles." The aliens moved with surprising discipline, immediately scanning both directions before advancing deeper into the corridor. Marcus waited. Not yet. The soldiers crossed an invisible line. Now, automated turrets hidden inside the ceiling suddenly emerged and opened fire. The corridor erupted into brilliant flashes as pulse rounds struck the Draxan armor. Although the armor absorbed several hits, the unexpected ambush forced the aliens to seek cover. Marcus's Marines attacked from two intersecting hallways, creating a deadly crossfire. One alien fell. Another raised a shimmering personal shield that blocked several rounds before collapsing under concentrated fire. The remaining soldiers retreated toward the breached hull. Marcus shouted, "Keep the pressure on." The battle echoed through the narrow corridors, every shot amplified by steel walls. Elsewhere aboard the ship, similar firefights erupted across multiple decks. Engineering teams defended reactor access tunnels. Security officers protected medical bays. Damage control crews rescued trapped sailors while explosions shook the vessel from distant impacts outside. Inside engineering, Sarah Chen watched security cameras as another boarding team advanced toward the reactor compartment. A technician looked terrified. "Doctor, we're engineers." Sarah picked up an emergency pulse rifle from the wall locker. "Today we're whatever this ship needs us to be." The technician nervously copied her. Minutes later, Marcus's team finally secured the first breach site. 3 Marines required medical evacuation, while 2 Draxan soldiers had been captured alive after being stunned by electromagnetic grenades. David Ross hurried into the ship's interrogation chamber as security personnel restrained one unconscious alien inside a containment field. He studied the armor carefully. No translation software, no identification markings, no insignia. One intelligence specialist frowned. "Professional soldiers." David nodded. "Very." As technicians scanned the alien equipment, one recovered a compact holographic projector damaged during the firefight. A faint 3-dimensional map flickered into existence. David leaned closer. His eyes widened. "That's impossible." The hologram showed the complete internal layout of the Resolute. Every deck, every corridor, every compartment. One security officer stared in disbelief. "How do they have our ship's blueprint?" David ignored the question. Instead, he followed the highlighted route glowing across the projection. It bypassed the bridge, ignored the main reactor, avoided the weapon magazines. Every path converged toward one location: the quantum communication core. David immediately activated his communicator. "Commander, I've discovered their objective." Elena answered through the bridge channel. "Report." "They aren't trying to capture the ship." "What are they after?" David took a slow breath. "They're heading straight for the quantum communication core." Silence filled the bridge. Victor spoke first. "If they destroy it." David finished the thought. "Every Alliance ship in this sector loses real-time fleet coordination." Elena understood the consequences instantly. Without the quantum communication core, every human vessel would be forced to fight alone, relying on delayed communications while the perfectly coordinated Draxan fleet picked them apart one by one. She immediately opened a direct channel. "Lieutenant Hale." Marcus answered between bursts of gunfire. "Hale here. No matter what happens." She paused only briefly. "You cannot let them reach that core." Marcus tightened his grip on his rifle. "They won't get past us, Commander." Then he turned toward his exhausted Marines. "The real fight starts now." The battle had now raged for nearly 40 minutes, and neither fleet showed any sign of breaking. Across millions of kilometers of empty space, hundreds of weapons flashed like artificial stars. Human cruisers fought desperately to protect damaged allies while Draxan warships pressed their numerical advantage with relentless discipline. Wreckage drifted silently between the combatants, the remains of ships from both sides slowly spinning through the darkness. The Sentinel line, once a symbol of peace, had become a graveyard of steel and fire. On the bridge of the Resolute, the atmosphere remained tense but controlled. Commander Elena Ward stood before the tactical display, studying every movement instead of reacting to each new crisis. Her officers had learned that when she became quiet, she was thinking several steps ahead. "Tactical status?" she asked. The tactical officer answered immediately. "We've confirmed 6 enemy ships destroyed and another 4 heavily damaged." "And our losses?" The officer hesitated. 5 Alliance vessels confirmed destroyed. 3 more have lost propulsion and are drifting. Casualty reports are still coming in. No one celebrated the enemy losses. Every victory had been purchased with human lives. Victor Hayes looked at the display. "We're holding better than they expected." Elena nodded slightly. "Because every captain stopped trying to win individually." David Ross added, the smaller battle groups are covering one another. It's slowing the Draxan advance. Before anyone could speak again, a desperate transmission burst through the communication system. This is the cruiser Aegis. We've lost engine power. Enemy destroyers are closing fast. Request immediate assistance. Another voice followed almost instantly. This is escort frigate Sentinel 3. We're diverting to cover them. Victor frowned. That frigate's barely half their size. Elena looked at the tactical display. They know. The bridge watched in silence as the tiny frigate accelerated directly toward two advancing Draxan destroyers. Its shields flared under repeated enemy fire, yet it continued firing everything it had. The sacrifice forced the enemy ships to divert their attention long enough for rescue tugs to begin towing the crippled cruiser away. The communications officer quietly reported, the Sentinel-3 has lost contact. Nobody needed to ask what that meant. Meanwhile, several decks below, the battle inside the Resolute had become even more brutal. Lieutenant Marcus Hale's Marines fought room by room, forcing the Draxan boarding teams away from critical systems. Every corridor had become a defensive line. Smoke filled the air, emergency sprinklers hissed continuously, and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the steel passageways. Marcus checked his ammunition. Status. Sergeant Olivia Grant answered between heavy breaths. Second squad has secured Deck 9. Casualties? 4 wounded. Marcus nodded. Third squad? Another Marine lowered his helmet. We lost Corporal Jensen. The room fell silent for only a moment. Marcus finally spoke. He bought his time. No one argued. They all understood. Moments later another alarm echoed through the corridor. Movement detected near Maintenance Junction 7. Marcus looked toward the tactical display mounted on the wall. They're changing routes. Olivia frowned. They've figured out our defensive positions. Marcus shook his head. No. He enlarged the ship schematic. They're adapting. The Draxans had stopped attacking heavily defended corridors. Instead, they were moving through maintenance tunnels, ventilation shafts, and service passages that few humans ever used. They're learning our ship, Marcus said quietly. Back in engineering, Dr. Sarah Chen was examining unusual energy readings collected during the fleet battle. Although explosions continued rocking the Resolute, she barely noticed them. Her attention remained fixed on dozens of fluctuating graphs covering her workstation. One technician pointed toward the display. Doctor. Every enemy transmission is synchronized. Sarah zoomed in. It isn't just communication. What do you mean? She overlaid sensor recordings collected from several Alliance ships. Her eyes narrowed. The flagship. The technician looked confused. What about it? Sarah highlighted several energy spikes. Every Draxan ship adjusts its movements immediately after the flagship emits one of these bursts. The technician stared at the graphs. So they're not making independent decisions. Sarah immediately opened a secure channel. Commander Ward, I think I found something. Elena answered at once. I'm listening. The damaged flagship isn't just another battleship. Sarah transmitted her analysis. It's functioning as a battlefield coordination relay. David Ross quickly examined the incoming data. She's right. Sarah continued. The flagship sends synchronized command pulses across the entire fleet. Every maneuver, every attack pattern, every formation change originates there. Victor folded his arms. If we destroy it, David completed the thought. The enemy fleet loses centralized coordination. The bridge became silent again. It was the first real opportunity they had discovered since the ambush began. Elena looked toward the tactical display. Can we reach it? The tactical officer immediately answered. Not easily. The display magnified the center of the battlefield. The damaged flagship remained almost motionless, exactly where it had been since the battle began. Unlike before, however, it was now surrounded by overlapping defensive formations. 6 destroyers, 4 cruisers, 2 missile carriers. Every approach corridor was protected. Victor sighed. They knew we'd eventually figure it out. David nodded. Which means destroying that ship was always going to be difficult. Elena remained thoughtful. They're protecting information, not firepower. Victor looked at her. What do you mean? If the flagship were simply another battleship, they'd keep it moving. She pointed toward the display. Instead, they're building the fleet around it. Sarah's voice returned over the channel. Commander, there's something else. Go ahead. The flagship's shield output is unstable. David immediately looked interested. Battle damage? Possibly. Sarah enlarged another graph. The shield generators keep compensating for internal damage. Victor smiled slightly. So it's weaker than it looks. Sarah quickly corrected him. No. Her voice became serious. It's unpredictable. She continued studying the readings. I can't identify a consistent weakness yet. Elena nodded. Keep looking. The channel closed. Before anyone could discuss the discovery further, another urgent transmission arrived from Marcus Hale. Commander, enemy boarding teams have regrouped. Location? They've concentrated near the central transit hub. David immediately checked the ship schematic. That's only 3 decks below the quantum communication core. Marcus continued. We've slowed them down, but they're advancing more carefully now. Elena understood the implication. The Draxans had realized that rushing forward only increased their casualties. Now they were probing every defense, searching patiently for weaknesses. Marcus spoke again. They're no longer fighting like raiders. What are they fighting like? Elena asked. There was a brief pause. Like soldiers who expect a long war. Those words lingered across the bridge. Outside the ship, another violent explosion illuminated the battlefield as the Alliance cruiser Iron Resolve deliberately placed itself between a damaged hospital vessel and an incoming missile barrage. Its shields collapsed almost instantly, but the medical ship escaped. Victor watched the tactical display. More people giving their lives. Elena answered quietly. They're giving others a chance to keep fighting. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally David broke the silence. If we're going to stop this invasion. He looked toward the distant flagship. That ship has to fall. Elena continued watching the battle unfold across the stars. She knew he was right. But charging directly toward the Draxan flagship would only add the Resolute to the growing field of wreckage. If humanity wanted to survive, they needed more than courage. They needed a plan. And somewhere inside the damaged alien flagship, hidden beneath layers of armor and surrounded by an entire battle group, lay the key to turning the tide of the war. The battle had entered its second hour, and exhaustion was becoming as dangerous as enemy fire. Across the shattered frontier, Alliance crews fought through smoke-filled compartments, failing reactors, and collapsing shield grids while still answering every order that reached them. Ammunition reserves were running low on several ships, medical bays were overflowing with wounded sailors, and engineers worked non-stop to keep crippled vessels alive. Yet despite everything they had endured, the human fleet still held the line. The Draxans had expected panic after their ambush, but instead they faced an enemy that refused to surrender. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Elena Ward stared at the tactical display. The battlefield had changed dramatically. Several Draxan warships now showed damage from repeated Alliance counterattacks, but their formation around the flagship remained unbroken. Every attempt to approach the massive command vessel had been intercepted long before human ships came within firing range. Victor Hayes broke the silence. We've tried attacking from 3 different vectors. Every time, they reinforce the gap before we can exploit it. David Ross nodded. They're anticipating conventional tactics. Elena remained thoughtful. Then we'll stop being conventional. The bridge turned toward her. She enlarged the tactical map and highlighted 3 damaged Alliance cruisers drifting near the center of the battlefield. The Draxans believe we're trying to destroy the flagship. Victor frowned. We are. Yes, Elena replied calmly, but not in the way they expect. She looked at David. How many ships are still capable of high-speed maneuvers? David checked his display. 7 combat-capable warships, 4 destroyers, and 6 frigates. The rest are either damaged or protecting evacuation operations. Elena nodded. That will have to be enough. Before she could continue, Sarah Chen called from engineering. Commander, I think I've solved the shield fluctuations. Everyone on the bridge looked toward the communications console. Explain. Sarah transmitted a stream of sensor data. The flagship's damaged shield generators are constantly redistributing power to compensate for internal instability. At first the pattern looked random, but it isn't. David quickly analyzed the information. I see it. Sarah continued. Every 43 seconds, the forward shield network weakens for just under 2 seconds while energy is transferred to the port side generators. Victor leaned closer. 2 seconds? 1.8, Sarah answered. After that, the shield returns to full strength. The tactical officer frowned. That's barely enough time to fire. Sarah sighed. I know. Elena smiled slightly. But it is enough. She immediately opened a fleet-wide command channel. Attention all Alliance captains. New operational plan follows. Across the battlefield, weary commanders listened carefully. The enemy flagship has a predictable shield weakness lasting less than 2 seconds. We are going to create a firing corridor. One captain interrupted. Commander, every approach is covered. I know. Silence followed before Elena spoke again. Which is why some of us will have to draw those defenders away. No one needed further explanation. Several captains exchanged quiet glances aboard their own bridges. Finally, the voice of Captain Elias Monroe came over the channel. My cruiser Iron Vanguard will take the eastern approach. Another voice followed. The destroyer Falcon Crest will support. Then another. The frigate Resolute Wing is with you. One by one, volunteer ships stepped forward. None of them asked about survival. They already understood the cost. Victor lowered his voice. They know they may not come back. Elena looked at the glowing blue icons representing her fellow captains. They know exactly why they're going. Moments later, the operation began. The volunteer task groups accelerated toward opposite sides of the battlefield, deliberately making themselves impossible to ignore. Long-range plasma batteries opened fire on Draxon escorts while missile salvos streaked toward enemy destroyers. The attacks caused little immediate damage, but they forced the Draxon commanders to respond. As predicted, several defending cruisers peeled away from the flagship's protective rain. David watched the tactical display carefully. They're taking the bait. Victor corrected him. No. He looked toward Elena. They're taking the sacrifice. Outside, the cruiser Iron Vanguard absorbed the full force of concentrated enemy fire. Its shields collapsed within seconds, yet it continued advancing, firing every remaining weapon at the approaching Draxon destroyers. A strained voice echoed across the fleet channel. This is Iron Vanguard. Hull integrity falling below 30%. Another captain answered immediately. We're moving to cover you. No. Captain Monroe's voice remained remarkably calm. Stay on mission. The transmission ended. Seconds later, the cruiser disappeared inside a blinding explosion that illuminated half the battlefield. No one on the Resolute spoke. Every officer simply watched another blue icon vanish from the display. Meanwhile, inside the battleship, Lieutenant Marcus Hale's Marines were fighting the most desperate battle of the day. The Draxon boarding force had reached the final defensive perimeter surrounding the quantum communication core. Only one reinforced corridor remained between them and the chamber that coordinated the Alliance fleet. Marcus looked at the soldiers gathered around him. Many carried damaged armor. Several had bandaged wounds. Their ammunition was dangerously low. Sergeant Olivia Grant checked her rifle. 2 magazines left. Another Marine answered, 1. Marcus nodded. Then make every shot count. A deep metallic boom echoed through the corridor. The reinforced blast door trembled violently. They're breaching, someone whispered. Marcus activated his communicator. Commander, they're making their final push. Elena answered immediately. Hold that corridor. We will. He looked around at his exhausted Marines. No one gets through. The next explosion ripped the blast door apart. Smoke filled the passage as heavily armored Draxon soldiers charged forward behind portable energy shields. Marcus waited until they entered the narrow kill zone. Fire. Pulse rifles erupted together. The confined corridor magnified every explosion as plasma bolts struck armor and shields alike. The first wave stalled beneath the relentless crossfire, but more aliens continued advancing from behind. Olivia threw an electromagnetic grenade. It detonated with a sharp blue flash, collapsing 2 enemy shields and allowing concentrated rifle fire to bring their carriers down. Still they advanced. One towering Draxon commander broke through the defensive line, knocking a Marine aside with incredible strength before raising his heavy energy blade. Marcus intercepted him. The two crashed into the corridor wall as sparks erupted around them. The alien was stronger. Marcus was faster. He dodged a powerful swing, drove his combat knife into a gap beneath the alien's shoulder armor, then fired his sidearm point blank into the exposed opening. The Draxon commander staggered before collapsing to the deck. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining boarding soldiers hesitated for the first time. Marcus seized the opportunity. Advance! The surviving Marines surged forward together, forcing the exhausted Draxons back through the shattered breach. Minutes later, the last enemy soldier fell. The corridor became silent except for heavy breathing and the distant sounds of the fleet battle still raging outside. Marcus slowly lowered his rifle. Olivia looked around at the battered survivors. "We actually did it." Marcus shook his head. "No." He looked upward, knowing the decisive battle was still unfolding beyond the ship's hull. "We've only given them a chance." Back on the bridge, Sarah's countdown timer appeared across every Alliance command display. The flagship's next shield fluctuation was only moments away. Every surviving human warship quietly altered course. Every weapon locked onto the same point. Every captain waited. The fate of the Sentinel line would be decided within the next 2 seconds. For a brief moment, the entire battlefield became strangely quiet. The constant exchange of weapons fire continued across distant sectors, but every surviving Alliance vessel had stopped firing. Every captain, every pilot, and every soldier waited for the same signal. The damaged Draxon flagship remained at the center of the battlefield, surrounded by its remaining escorts. Its shields pulsed unevenly, rising and falling as damaged systems struggled to maintain protection. The enemy still looked powerful, but humanity had discovered the one weakness hidden beneath its armor. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Elena Ward watched the countdown appear on the tactical display. 30 seconds. No one spoke. The bridge crew knew that this attack would decide everything. If they succeeded, the Draxon fleet would lose its coordination and humanity would survive. If they failed, the remaining Alliance ships would have no strength left for another attempt. Victor Hayes looked at the fleet display. "We're asking damaged ships to do the impossible." Elena kept her eyes on the flagship. Most victories begin that way. The countdown continued. 20 seconds. Outside, the volunteer ships maintained their positions, still drawing enemy escorts away from the flagship. Some were barely operational, their hulls damaged and shields nearly gone. But they continued moving because every second they survived created a better chance for the final strike. Aboard one of the damaged frigates, a captain watched his failing systems. "Engine status?" His officer answered. 40% power remaining. "Weapons?" "One functional battery." The captain looked toward the distant Draxon flagship. "Then let's make the last one count." Back aboard the Resolute, Sarah Chen's voice came through the communication channel. "Commander, shield cycle confirmed. Next weakness window begins in 10 seconds. The tactical officer locked weapons onto the target. All available batteries ready." Elena looked around the bridge. Every officer was exhausted. Every person had lost someone during the battle. Yet they were still there. "Prepare to fire." The countdown reached 5 seconds. The Draxon fleet suddenly reacted. David Ross looked alarmed. "They've detected something." The tactical display showed several enemy ships turning back toward the flagship. "They're abandoning their positions." Victor cursed quietly. "They know." The Draxons had finally understood that the human attack was not a distraction. It was the real assault. "Can they reach us in time?" Elena asked. The tactical officer checked the distance. "Maybe." Elena didn't hesitate. "Then we fire early." The bridge officers looked surprised. "Commander, the shield window hasn't opened yet." "I know, but our chance of success is better than waiting for them to stop us." The tactical officer nodded. Beginning firing sequence. Across the battlefield, every surviving Alliance ship released its stored energy. Hundreds of weapons fired together. Plasma beams, railgun rounds, missiles, experimental energy weapons, all of them aimed at a single location on the Draxon flagship. For a moment, the enemy shields held. The combined attack created a massive wave of energy that spread across the battlefield. Then Sarah shouted. The shield transfer just started. The tactical officer watched the readings. Shield weakness detected. The first barrage had forced the flagship's systems into emergency redistribution. The second wave arrived at exactly the right moment. The weakened shields collapsed. Human weapons tore through the exposed armor beneath. Deep inside the Draxon flagship, alarms must have been screaming. The enormous vessel finally responded, activating its remaining weapons and firing wildly toward the approaching Alliance fleet. Several human ships were struck. One destroyer lost its entire forward section. Another cruiser vanished inside a storm of explosions. But the attack continued. Elena watched the flagship's damage readings climb. Report. The tactical officer stared at his console. Outer armor breached. Continue. Internal systems failing. Continue. The flagship attempted to turn away. David looked surprised. They're retreating. Elena shook her head. No. She watched the damaged engines struggling to activate. They're trying to survive. The Draxon commander had made the same calculation Elena would have made. The flagship could no longer win the battle. Escape was the only logical option. But the damage was too severe. The reactor had already begun destabilizing. Sarah suddenly spoke. Commander, their core temperature is rising rapidly. Can they shut it down? She paused. No. The bridge became silent. Why? The damage is too deep. Their containment systems are failing. The tactical display showed the enormous vessel beginning to break apart. Sections of its hull separated as explosions erupted from within. The Draxon flagship, the symbol of their invasion, was dying. Elena watched quietly. She did not celebrate. She knew the cost of what had happened. Thousands of people had lost their lives. Entire ships had been destroyed. The battlefield was filled with the remains of both civilizations. Then the flagship's reactor finally collapsed. A brilliant blue-white explosion consumed the center of the battlefield. The shockwave pushed through space, scattering debris and forcing nearby vessels to retreat. The Draxon flagship was gone. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the communications officer looked up. Commander. He struggled to believe what he was seeing. The enemy fleet is breaking formation. David checked the data. They've lost the command relay. Without the flagship's coordination signals, the Draxon vessels no longer moved as one. Their perfect formations disappeared. Their attacks became slower and less organized. But they did not fight recklessly. The surviving Draxon commanders immediately recognized the situation and began withdrawing toward hyperspace. Victor watched the enemy ships disappear one by one. They're retreating. Elena nodded. They're not defeated. She looked at the damaged battlefield around them. They're calculating. The last Draxon ship vanished into a flash of light. Silence returned to the Sentinel line. Not peace. Not yet. Only silence. Hours later, rescue operations began. Alliance ships searched through the wreckage, recovering survivors and recording the names of those who would never return home. The Resolute itself had suffered severe damage, but its crew had survived. In the command center, David Ross reviewed the data recovered from the destroyed flagship. Commander, we managed to decrypt part of their database. Elena looked up. What did you find? David hesitated. Information about their fleet structure. Victor stepped closer. How large are we talking? David brought up the recovered files. The numbers appeared on the screen. The room became quiet. That ship was not their main fleet. Elena stared at the information. What was it? David answered slowly. An expeditionary force. A cold feeling filled the room. How many more fleets? Victor asked. David looked at the numbers. Unknown. Elena returned her gaze to the stars outside the damaged bridge window. Humanity had survived its first encounter with the Draxon Dominion. But it had learned a dangerous truth. The ship they destroyed was not the beginning of the invasion. It was only a warning. The frontier had been silent for 20 years. Now humanity finally understood why. Something beyond the stars had been watching. And now it knew humanity was ready to fight.